launch of MadisonAlley.tv. We're excited to continue our fireside chat series entitled A Founder's Story, The Path to a Landmark Transaction. And today we have none other than Brian O'Kelly, co-founder and former CEO of AppNexus. So let us begin with some introductions. First, Doug Knopper will be co-hosting alongside me, and Doug is the co-founder and former co-CEO of Freewheel, the video ad platform that was acquired by Comcast for $375 million. Doug is also a special advisor to Madison Alley, where he advises and provides tremendous insight and experience to all our clients. Doug, thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to have you here with us.
Glad to be here.
And of course, Brian O'Kelly, co-founder and former CEO of AppNexus. Brian is a former CTO of Right Media, where he invented the online ad exchange. In 2007, Yahoo acquired Right Media for a reported $850 million. Subsequent to leading Right Media as a CTO, Brian was a co-founder and former CEO of AppNexus, the leading cloud-based platform for optimizing programmatic online advertising. And currently, Brian is the founder and CEO of Waybridge, the technology and data science company that creates efficiencies in trade and physical commodities. Brian's also an active board member of Tech NYC. Brian, thanks so much for joining us. We're really delighted to have you here and excited to hear your story.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So we'll begin with just a brief overview of Madison Alley. Our focus is specifically and exclusively on digital marketing, advertising, and commerce, technologies, data, and services. We're led by strategic buyers and investors across this sector. We're based in New York City with a significant presence in Silicon Valley and San Diego. And typical transaction sizes range from capital raising of $10 to $150 million and M&A transactions between $25 and $300 million. Our strategic M&A and advisory group, Madison Alley Global Ventures, is fueled by exceptional insight from MadisonAlley.tv, the premium content here from leaders, luminaries, and distinguished founders, as well as the Madison Alley Distinguished Network of those same leaders, luminaries, and founders, connecting socially and building relationships across a global network in this sector. So with that, we'll begin with our agenda today. So we'll hear the story of AppNexus from Brian for an hour from 1 to 2 o'clock, and we'll go through the full cycle of the business from its pre-founding and founding all the way through the post-transaction experience, including the strategic positioning of AppNexus, its proprietary technology, the 6 rounds of capitalization from Series A through F, and the 4 acquisitions. It's the pre-M&A planning and ultimately successful strategic exit to AT&T, where it was acquired for $1.8 billion. Finally, we'll hear the post-transaction experience that Brian's had and where he is today, and have about 10 minutes for the remainder of Q&A, and appreciate all the questions that were submitted by our registered attendees. So with that, I'll hand it over to Doug, who will bring us through an overview of AppNexus. Thanks, Doug.
Hey, Brian, good to see you. Let's get started here. So, look, let me just kind of set the stage here on a little bit of background, and then we'll jump in and get more color commentary from you. So, like Freewheel, you were founded in 2007. You, Michael and Mike started it. I had the opportunity to work with Michael closely at DoubleClick. So there's a lot of shared roots between my company and my former company and your former. You raised $271 million. It took about 11 years, but you got yourself acquired by AT&T for $1.6 billion, which is an amazing outcome. We'll be talking about this in more detail about the funding rounds, but it looks like you did about 6 funding rounds and had some amazing investors ranging from strategics like Microsoft and News to VC investors, Khosla, Venrock, et cetera. So we'll definitely talk a little bit about those. Love to sort of get started and talk a little bit more about kind of the beginning prior to the founding of AppNexus. And I think you started at Right Media. Can you kind of give us a little bit of the sort of transition from your start at Right Media to what got you to AppNexus and everything that happened around that time?
Yeah, happy to. it's funny because thinking all the way back to 2003, when I started at Right Media, it felt like we were really late to the game in the online advertising world, which probably sounds funny today. But there'd already been a full cycle of companies that had been created, and DoubleClick, as an example, in the dot-com boom was worth, close to $20 billion, and then it had dropped to be worth, maybe $1 billion. And the ad tech landscape in '03 was pretty devastated, like much of the dot-com landscape. And so for me, when I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, I was basically an unemployed computer programmer with a background in large-scale distributed computing and real-time prediction. And there were really only two industries that were possible. One was high-frequency trading on Wall Street, and the other one was advertising. And neither of those was incredibly appealing. I guess I chose the lesser of two evils and joined Right Media, which was an ad network. And the entire Right Media office was about the big as this room. There were 4 people in it, in the back of the Poindexter Systems office. And, I basically told Mike Walrath, who was the CEO of Right Media, that I could build an awesome predictive ad server. And he said, well, why would I trust you? Like, you're some random 25-year-old kid. Like, what makes you think you could do this when, there's been $1 billion invested in DoubleClick and these other companies? And so kind of took a risk and hired me, didn't give me any equity in Right Media, just said, okay, let's try this out. And about 6 months later,
why did you think you could do that? Like, why did you think you could do that better than anybody else?
Well, I was 25 years old. I thought I could do anything better than anybody else. Are you kidding?
All right, fair enough. Good answer.
But actually, I had been working previously as a consultant doing real-time predictive content management systems, and actually installed a system at American Express that when you log into your account, it would choose which offers to show you in real time based on your profile data. It's interesting because if you think about your Amex profile, they know everything you've ever spent on your credit card. And so the data you're mining is massive, and it's super personalized. It's categorized to how much have you spent on online groceries, and how much have you spent on e-commerce, which in 2000, when we did that project, was 0 and 0. But it went down to everything you'd bought. And so in real time, to be able to pull that data together, map it to different offers, they could figure out if you often take a cruise from Miami, then they could say, well, you should probably get the Disney World, fancy platinum card offer. That doubled the response rate on the Amex portal, which produced over $1 billion in incremental profit for Amex. So I was hooked on this idea of real-time prediction. Interestingly, DoubleClick was also running at Amex, doing all of their non-data enriched transactions. And it was basically a stupid decision. It was just highest priority, next highest priority. So we have this massive data science driven real-time prediction that's producing $1 billion of value. And you've got this like ad rotator, if you're not logged in, that does nothing. And so I had this sense that I'd seen what could happen. And the idea of taking that data rich to a not data rich, I did another project for astrology.net, where we instrumented the astrology.net site. And if you were a Leo and you clicked on the love horoscope, we would try to upsell you to a packet. And we used the same engine to see if we could use astrology to predict behavior. And if you think you can use astrology symbols to predict behavior, then cookies sound great. And so that was sort of my career path towards this. So it wasn't quite as random as I'm making it out to be. But the idea that you could predict response was useless in 2003 because there was no way to apply that. It would just reprioritize DoubleClick to make something higher or lower priority. And that's actually what DFP shipped. Mike Walrath's thought was, why don't we show the ad that has the highest likely revenue? Let's take the predicted likelihood of an interaction, a click or a conversion, and multiply that by the value. And let's use the effective CPM to prioritize ads. And my innovation was, let's do that in real time and let's hold an auction. And so that was the first innovation that led to the ad exchange, which was, of course, running those auctions across multiple ad networks, across all the supply and all the demand. But that blink of an eye, real-time prediction at internet scale was like this weird superpower I had from my academic computer science background at Princeton, from having these experiences doing real-time prediction in the real world for a couple years prior, and having this incredible expertise from Mike Walrath and Matt Phillips and Aaron Letcher, who had been at DoubleClick running the ad network and actually knew the business. And so I think so sort of keep this together that was what made Right Media such a special place.
And it's funny because your example on Amex, at the time when that was happening, I was at DoubleClick, and we couldn't be any happier with our share of the business because we had the bulk of the revenue business from Amex, on not really seeing what you guys were doing backstage and sort of, you know, starting to displace us. How did you move from that into AppNexus? How did AppNexus get a start?
Yeah, so, you know, Right Media was a rocket ship. You know, we invented this ad exchange and started to get market traction. And all of a sudden, you know, my phone was ringing off the hook with people wanting to join, because every ad network that joined would see incredible results. And so this starts spiraling into, you know, we went from 1 billion ads a month in 04, 2 billion in 05, 35 billion in 06, 100 billion a month in 07. I mean, just incredible growth. And I signed Yahoo as a customer in 06, and they bought us in 07. And it was cool because it was my account. That was my first massive enterprise sales deal in the industry. And I got really deep with the core team at Yahoo, and, you know, would show up in their office wearing like ripped jeans and flip-flops because I thought that was like how you did deals. And as we headed into spring of 07, I just saw this incredible potential. Like, it was just clear that the ad exchange model was going to be massive. And Mike Walrath, who was the CEO of Right Media, was like, we should sell this. Like, we can get $1 billion for this company. I was like, how are we going to get $1 billion? Like, we're like, you know, 200 guys, like, we don't even know what we're doing. Like, this is a completely like baby business. And we had a big fight that he won. And I ended up leaving the company. And I left the day before the acquisition, which meant that I lost all my invested equity. And
Ouch.
I think he proved to be correct, because we did get almost $1 billion for the company, but I was also right that it was a massive industry and a huge opportunity. And so immediately I turned around and started AppNexus, initially to be the infrastructure provider for the next phase. I thought that we were going to see all these companies building real-time predictive ad businesses, and they would need a cloud. And I just started playing with AWS. I was convinced that Amazon was not really going to invest in cloud. Like, this was a side project for them. They would never be able to handle the scale and performance needs of ad tech. And so the world was going to need a high performance ad cloud. And that was the idea behind AppNexus. I think it was right that the world needed a high performance ad cloud, a little bit wrong about AWS. So that turned out to be a thing. And I think at one point, ad tech was about 25% of all server instances on AWS. So right business model, wrong choice of competitor. But that was really the transition for me, was wanting to prove that I could run and scale a business, you know, a bet on what we now call programmatic, a bet on, you know, this industry that I'd helped to start. And yeah, that was the transition point to AppNexus.
And Brian, how did that strategy evolve, and what was that strategy and vision that led to the initial capitalization, if that was a, you know, initial kind of significant milestone for the company?
Well, that summer, the summer of 07, I mean, it was a big deal. The Right Media transaction was massive for New York. I mean, coming off of the .com crash, there weren't really that many deals of that scale in New York City. And I was really a New York homer. I guess I still am. You know, I was convinced that New York could be a tech hub. And the disparity between Silicon Valley and New York was massive. Yeah. Boston was bigger than New York back then. And so there was a bunch of press, you know, and other things happening, not about me, but about Right Media. Mm-hmm. And so I went out to Silicon Valley. I'd met this guy named Ron Conway at a barbecue. And I went to meet him and I said, hey, I want to build the high performance cloud for advertising and other scale markets. And he said, you should go talk to Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz because they did Loud Cloud and Opsware.
Yeah.
And he said, Brian, you got to wear a helmet for this meeting because they're going to tell you how dumb your idea is. Like they're going to just tear it apart. Mm-hmm. Now, Mark Andreessen was my childhood idol. And it tells you about my childhood. But in high school, I launched my first web server. I launched my website development business reading his manuals on what a CGI bin program was. And if you don't know what that is, go find those manuals. And so I was so excited. I got on 101. I went to their office. It was still Opsware at that time. And so we go in this conference room, and it's the Ron Conway Enterprise Conference Room. And it's pretty cool that they named the conference room after Ron Conway. And by the way, I named the conference room after all these people at AppNexus in homage to this first meeting. And I explained to Mark and Ben what I was doing, totally like awed by them. And they spent the whole meeting just telling me all the reasons this was a terrible idea. And actually the list of things they said to me, I have the notebook. It is like an amazing download. It should be a master class or something in like how to think about enterprise businesses. Uh-huh. At the end of the meeting, I was like, okay, glad I wore a helmet. That was a horrible meeting. I'm really sorry I wasted your time. And Ben goes, are you kidding? We want to invest. And I was like, oh. And then at the meeting, just listening, was this guy named David Wyden from Kozla Ventures. And he walks out of the room and says, well, I'm investing too. And he follows my car up the road back to the Kozla office. And he says, okay, meet me later. I meet him at the Creamery in Palo Alto. And I got back on the plane that night with a term sheet for a oversubscribed $2.5 million seed round, which not only was massive for the time, it was Mark and Ben and Ron and Kozla and first round. It was just, I couldn't have been more starstruck. And so, yeah, it was amazing.
At that time, you didn't have a business, is that right? You had an idea of what you wanted to build, but how much of a business or company did you have at that point?
I think at that point, we had started to put the cloud pieces together. Like we had proof of concept running. But don't forget there was no cloud. So to actually launch a cloud, you had to have data centers and servers and routers and bandwidth. So it was a very capital intensive business. What I had done though, is I had been talking to Joe Zawadzki from MediaMath and to the Open Ads founders, it was not OpenX yet, and to the Invite Media founders who were doing a social video platform, and all the people who were likely to do stuff in and around the space, and sort of pitching them on the idea for the cloud, the AdMeld guys, all these folks, Ben Barakis, like this was my group of people, and we all kind of collaborated to launch programmatic. So all those companies that started, you and John, I was talking to John Heller, about Freewheel at this time. I
remember that meeting.
Yeah. And he was at Yahoo when he was my client at Yahoo, interestingly. So like all this stuff was happening. Like this was this rebirth of ad tech. And I was investing some of my Yahoo proceeds into these companies. I was advising companies. It was just a very exciting moment. So we didn't have like a business launched, but we had this ecosystem that was very nascent. And that's what, I think that's part of what got everybody excited. And made the investment make some sense.
I think one of the things that you guys saw more kind of clearly than certainly we did was where real-time bidding is going to go and how much that was going to change the landscape, both as a way of pricing, but also as a way of automation and time latency, and just all of that came together. And I know at Freewheel, we were certainly slow to see it because we were in a sort of a different space. The television side always comes late to the game on this kind of stuff. But you guys saw that so crystal clear. What was the insight that brought that about?
Well, at Right Media, we had, we built the bidding algorithm and the auction mechanism into one platform. So we could actually execute that very quickly. And that's the only reason it was technically possible to hold an auction, because it was all done on the same server. And at that time, it was almost impossible technically. But because of Moore's law, things were getting faster and faster. And we had a customer at Right Media who wanted to run a very sophisticated prediction algorithm. And they had data sets and they had all these things that should have been really juicy from a predictive perspective. And we initially thought that we would build a dynamic shared object, like a dynamic code object that they would compile their algorithm, push it into our servers. We'd deploy their code on all of our servers, load in all their data in memory, and try to execute that. And that was just so complicated. You know, every time they'd update the algorithm, we'd have to push it to all of our servers. So we were like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you could put your servers next to our servers, and then we would just call your servers in real time? Technically impossible in 2006. But I kept thinking about it, and that was actually one of the ideas that led to this idea of an ad cloud. What if they could just spawn up servers in our cloud next to our servers? Then they'd have their own environment, and we could put everybody in the same data centers and actually run these real-time predictions. And so this idea of auction richness or expressiveness was one of the problems with Right Media, because everyone ran the same algorithm. And so what we'd find is that adding new buyers wouldn't necessarily add more interesting liquidity. Everyone's bidding based on the same data sets. When Exalate started with Alad and team to bring in behavioral segments, that was a really powerful idea. If you could have your own data, then we built that in Right Media. But there's still algorithmic diversity that we needed. And so I think that was the Right Media realization that led to real-time bidding. At AppNexus, we had another strategic problem, which was, here comes DoubleClick with Google. Yahoo was mad because I started stealing all the engineers and customers from Right Media once my non-compete ended. And we started to move into building software and marketplaces because the cloud business wasn't going to work against Amazon. And so our strategic problem was, how do we deal with a world where all the big publishers use DFP? How do we get access to these ads and bring in demand if we're competing directly with Google? And then the big portals, AOL had an ad business and an ad stack. Yahoo had an ad business and an ad stack. Microsoft did. How do we plug into supply and demand? So on one side, you have algorithmic expressiveness. On the other side, you have this very technical question of how we're going to sneak in our bids, around all of this installed infrastructure. So I think it would say necessity breeds, this entire business model and technical model, maybe in ways that weren't the case in video, which was more nascent and didn't have the same install base that we had to sort of work around.
And so at this point now, you have this insight, the company's starting. Are you seeing revenue growth at this point, or are you just developing? It took us a long time to get to revenue growth. I mean, we did a lot of development and a lot of customer selling, and revenue lagged. Where were you guys on that curve?
Because we started with the cloud business, and that cloud business grew pretty quickly to about $5 million a run rate, but it wasn't profitable, or it was a little bit profitable, but it wasn't high margin, juicy revenue.
Yeah. Yep.
When we pivoted to the real-time platform, we pivoted in April of 2008, and we were in eBay's offices in December of 2008 with header bidding and our first open source bidder 8 months later. We beat Yahoo, Microsoft, Google to market with RTB. Again, desperation forced us that direction. And the business model was a hard part for us. We started off charging about a 5% rev share for header bidding. And even with eBay spending money, it just wasn't possible to make enough money without a lot of scale and a lot of demand. And no one was buying programmatic at that point. And so, it took us a while. Really, the revenue crank happened when we signed Microsoft in 2010. And we had, as an industry, the critical mass. And we had the anchor customer that forced everybody to plug in and work with us. And then we started to really see just this massive exponential growth. We also started tipping over some of the ad networks who used Yahoo and the Right Media platform, which had not had any innovation since we sold it. By 2010, Yahoo was just way behind technically And they'd sort of been anti-RTB because it was not good for their strategic position. They just couldn't compete with Google on one side and with us on the other side. And so if you were an ad network on that platform, you're starting to get left behind. And so a lot of those networks started to join us. We saw revenue from networks joining. We saw revenue from the Microsoft business. We saw revenue from just, sort of increased margin from not charging 5%, but maybe charging 10% on the sell side. And so from 2010 through 2015 or so, revenue just exploded.
Yeah, I'm curious to understand how was it for you as a CEO, as a founder and CEO now of AppNexus, where at Right Media and your prior experience were predominantly as a CTO and building technology and leading that, but what was it for you to be now a CEO and a founder and also being capitalized and being responsible for scaling a business at this point? And then I'd also like to, as we get further along, hear your perspective as you got further along of what it was like for you to be a CEO. But first at kind of this moment in time.
Yeah. So at Right Media, while I was the CTO, I was also running the ad exchange business unit. So I was responsible for all the sales, all the operations, every aspect of that business rolled into me. And so from the very first deal with Seidler Iridian to the last deal with Yahoo Japan, I was probably 80% of the sales activity personally, and then the team of folks who were selling either directly or indirectly worked with me on all of that. So commercially, I felt very confident that I could build the business. And from day one at AppNexus, Mike Nolan and I were out selling, and he's an incredible salesperson. It was kind of like having, just this terrible advantage because we'd seen it all, and everyone else was just waking up to ad exchanges. We literally run the first ad, so we knew everything. The hard part about being a CEO for me was two things. One was the emotional roller coaster, because we started in 2007. In 2008, the whole world fell apart.
Yeah,
we were trying to pivot our business in April of 2008, and all of a sudden over that summer, Lehman falls apart. Yeah. And I pitched 40 VCs and got rejected from every single one, including the VCs that had made tons of money off of Right Media, which was annoying. And I was just, I don't know, terrified, depressed. We almost sold the company to another ad tech company because we just couldn't find any capital. Yeah. And then I was like dressing up in a suit and flying to Boston every day, talking to VCs because they were all in Boston. I finally just gave up. I was just like, whatever, I'm not going to dress up for these meetings anymore. I'm just not going to care. And I went to Vinrock and I met with Mike Terrell, and I was like, look, whatever. I literally know everything about this industry. I know how to win. I have the best technology. I have the best people, and whatever. I guess I just can't fund this thing. He's like, how much do you need? And I had a term sheet. So my advice is, don't wear a suit to venture meetings. So
it was also the worst time to raise capital. I mean, we did the same thing, and it was just so depressing. Never been a worse time.
It was horrible. But trying to keep the team motivated. Also, we were pivoting, trying to let people go who were not a good fit for this business. That was hard. But you just, as we went forward, just trying to lead and communicate and not have all the stress weigh upon everybody was really hard. And I had a baby in 2009. My daughter was born. Doing this crazy deal with Microsoft, flying back and forth from Seattle twice a week and coming home and like crying baby, wanting to be a good dad, wanting to be a good husband, like all these things. Like it was just so stressful. So that was hard. And then the other thing was I'd never worked at a company bigger than 200 people. And Right Media was like 200 people for like 3 days before we sold it. So how do I know what processes look like? What am I supposed to do? Like, how do I hire? How do you hire a CFO for this crazy business model that no one understands, when you're growing incredibly fast and doing business in all these countries and currencies, how do you run an operating meeting? So these are things I just didn't know how to do. And thank God for Michael Rubenstein, because, he was the person who knew how to run a scale business. He was basically my coach and mentor. He taught me how to be a CEO. And for me, I don't see any way we could have made that business work, or I could have succeeded as a CEO without Michael as my, peer and coach and confidant and backbone and strategic mind. I mean, really so much of AppNexus was about Michael, and I just get to do all the fancy podcasts. So
Michael's amazing. I adore him. I know Michael Seidler's anxious to talk about capital, but I want to play off of something when we were talking a couple of weeks ago about this. As you were a first-time CEO or a new CEO, you had an interesting insight where you said that sometimes you have a million things on your mind and you want to go do whatever, or you're having a bad day or whatever, and you have to go do 5 status meetings or whatever. Those meetings are the most important meetings of the day for those people, whereas it's just another meeting for you. And that, when you said that, that really resonated with me as kind of what it takes to be a CEO. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. You had some interesting insight on that.
Yeah. I hired a coach. I went through a lot of coaches. I needed a lot of help. Therapists, coaches, advisors. It was a lot. But I had this coach, this guy, Bob Bontempo, who's a business school professor at Columbia. Amazing guy. And he said, look, here's my strategy. I'm just gonna come to some meetings. I'm gonna come sit in the office. And so he kind of watches me for a few days. And he says, Brian, when you walk around the office, you wear your heart on your sleeve. Everybody knows exactly what you're thinking. If you're having a bad day, you're grumpy. And if you're having a good day, you're happy. And everyone around you, as you walk, it's like this cloud of joy or cloud of despair. He's like, just do me a favor. Can you just walk around and smile and say hi to people today, regardless of how you're feeling? I'm like, that, it's not me. I'm an engineer. I don't believe in that. He said, just try it. And it was amazing. The difference in the environment of how people felt. My job was to be positive and there. And the same point you're making about meetings, I sit in 10 hours a day of meetings. We lost a deal, or, we violated our debt covenants. We're about to go bankrupt. In the next meeting, some hungry product manager walks in and says, I've got this great idea. We should open source header bidding, our one of our most important intellectual property items. Let's just give it away for free. Wait, time out, what? Which was, by the way, brilliant. And I hated the idea, and I thought it was the worst thing we could possibly do. And I let them do it anyway. And they were totally right. But that's where I realized I have to be present. I have to be in this meeting. Yeah. I have to be prepared. I asked folks to send me read ahead so I could do some of that prep the night before. I would send comments, but I had to be on my A game all day long. And so one of the ongoing AppNexus jokes was, wait till Saturday morning when Brian starts reading his email and actually doing things, because you'll get 100 emails, because that's the first time in a week I haven't been trapped in my little conference room, trying to be in something of a good mood and present. And everyone who knows me knows there's always a chocolate bar somewhere nearby, because this was the only thing I could do to keep myself going through the course of those long days.
Great CEO insight. Michael, you wanted to?
Yes, so we're going to bring up a slide here and start going through the capitalization, which I'm sure is your favorite part of the story here. But you did have phenomenal success and raised 6 rounds from Series A through F, in total about $270 million or so. And so there's obviously a lot to go through here, but in particular, and you already talked us through the angel round with Mark Andreessen, Ben, and Ron, but perhaps you can talk about some of these milestones. For example, raising $50 million from Microsoft and Venrock. Would love to hear that story. And then also, WPP and how that has had impacted the business.
Yeah. So, if you look through this story, someone asked in the Q&A, why didn't I self-fund with my Yahoo proceeds? Well, one reason is because when we sold Yahoo, the stock price was $29. And a year later, the stock price was $7. And strongly recommend, if you ever sell a company, sell the stock immediately. Immediately. Which I did not, because my tax guy is like, if you hold it for a year, you'll save 20% in taxes.
Right.
I fired that accountant. I didn't have the capital to do a business like this. Even the cloud business, I knew would be massively capital intensive to compete with Amazon and others. Same thing with this business. We were competing with Google and Yahoo and Microsoft and AOL. And so these partners were so important for us. But the most important partner was really Microsoft, because not only did they invest $42 million, they put their entire business on our platform, and they made us the company we ended up being. So I think the strategics were really, really important in our thesis, which was we wanted them to see us as an ally against Google. I mean, Microsoft and Google were in a massive search competition. Our case to them was not just give us some money, we're a good company. It was, we'll help you keep Google from tipping the market with search. If you look at WPP, our thesis there was, this is the biggest ad agency in the world. Xaxis was a big investment area. They were a client. You know, what if WPP could do the same thing on the buy side? That did not work out very well for a lot of reasons, but it turned out WPP couldn't convince their clients to move spend in the same way. In fact, they were scared of moving spend because of the perceived conflict of interest. So not every strategic partnership worked out that way. But Yahoo Japan was a great partner. News Corp ended up being a great partner. They took longer to migrate than we thought they would. I think they migrated after the sale to AT&T. So it would have been nice to have that one in the bag beforehand. And then we had some more financial partners like Fidelity, who was wonderful as a partner, like very engaged, really helping us think about being public. Like they helped us explain how they think about a public company, and to think about the company not as all these great ideas, but like, hey, what's your growth rate? What's your operating margin? You know, how does your pro forma look? And as we moved closer and closer to going public, because we'd filed an S1 and gotten through comments, like we were ready to file when we sold, it was great to have their perspective of how this would look to them. And, you know, they said, you know, they didn't say this in like any official way, but like, if you do these things, like we'd sign up and want to buy a lot of the IPO, you know, and if you don't do these things, no one's going to want to buy your IPO. Like I still have never worked at a public company. So it was really helpful to have that kind of perspective.
So you had a tremendous amount of experience going through, 6 rounds that were successful, strategic investors, very prominent financial investors. Can you talk a little bit about just generally, what you learned through this process in terms of when you thought it was a good time to raise capital, who were the right partners, and anything else that you think was, that you learned or would do, the same or differently?
Well, one thing I think might be helpful for folks to know is that we never really ran a process for fundraising. We tried with the Series D. TCV had been, or no, the Series E, I guess, the one where we did Fidelity. I've been talking to Gavin Baker at Fidelity, and he was like, hey, we might be interested. We hired JP Morgan to run a process, and the process ended with us taking money from Fidelity. And that was very typical. When we ran the process to sell the company, it sort of started with a conversation with AT&T, who was, Brian Lesser, who had been a client and been on our board. And, it was a very obvious conversation. Almost everything we did was based on relationships. And one of the things that I think really served us well was all of our investors and partners and banks making introductions and connecting us, but not like, hey, meet so-and-so, but like, get together, have a real substantive discussion, maybe do some business together. And those things became what led to financing or led to strategic conversations.
Yeah.
And
yeah, go ahead.
You go, Michael.
Yes. So maybe you could also just comment on the acquisition. So, there were 4 acquisitions there: Alente, Media Glue, YieldX, and Real Media. Some of them a bit larger than others, like YieldX. What was your rationale for the 4 different acquisitions?
Well, I think the timeline here is really helpful to think about this. So if you look at the left side, it's like the Series A, we're a cloud company. Series B, we're a real-time bidding company with no revenue, and then you get the Series C where it's like, we're going to be the market winner. And in fact, we didn't even spend that 50 million because we were growing so fast and producing so much revenue. The TCV round was kind of like the, icing on the cake round. Like, we were going to be a unicorn back when that meant probably more than it does today. And we didn't really know what we were going to spend the money on. We just thought, let's get it when we can. But we realized we were going to run out of market space, that just being a display first ad platform was going to cap out. There's an S curve. And because we were the market leader, there was just no more space without going into an adjacent market. Our choices were mobile, video, publisher, or advertiser. And we decided that publisher was the most interesting. And so if you look at these acquisitions, YieldX and OAS were both super important, super strategic ad server assets that we thought we could use to build and compete with Google. Alenti was a viewability toolkit that we thought we could use to change the entire industry to make views the standard. And Media Glue was an identity platform, and that didn't work out very well for a variety of reasons. But our thought was, could we standardize on how we identify users, beyond a cookie? So each of these were sort of based on a strategic set of bets. And the time frame there is because it was when we saw that we were, heading into the top of the S curve, and we wanted to place some bets on the next S curve. And that was just a strategic planning thing. By the time we started to really slow down in revenue because of, sort of being at such a huge percentage of the market, we thought we could get some of these investments and this publisher play to a point where it would be a major revenue driver.
Mm-hmm. So you've raised now 270 million. You've done 4 of your own acquisitions. As you just said, the law of big numbers is starting to kick in. Your growth is slowing. You're in 2016. What's going through your head, and what happens over the next 18 months?
Well, this is when we're like, writing the S1, and we're, actively dealing with kind of a capital crunch. I think a lot of people know that we fired about a third of our customers through this process, because my realization was that we couldn't be an ad network centric business and really achieve what we set out with in the publisher business. We had to make some hard choices, and doing that caused our revenue to drop. It caused our growth to drop, some layoffs, and we then had to reaccelerate. I think that was the right strategic decision, and I know people might say we should have done it sooner. From my perspective, the realization that we could have a huge impact in the market as a publisher-centric company was the culmination of all this. And so the cleaning up of the business from an audit perspective, the cleaning up from a customer perspective, thinking about things like our policy on content. Like we fired Breitbart from the platform. We refused to run ads on Breitbart because of some hate speech that they had been writing. All of this came together with this new vision we had for what AppNexus would look like in 2025. And I actually printed shirts that were like, the next 10 years. And I wish we'd gotten there, because I think what we were trying to build was incredibly important and valuable. And if you look at this sort of conversation around Twitter and Facebook and how they played the political landscape, we would have handled that very, very differently. And we started doing that in 2016, not in 2020. But that process, also because of the big number point, we knew we weren't going to be growing 30% a year indefinitely. And that as a public company, we were less appealing at our growth rate, which was good. It just wasn't, 30, 40%. We weren't going to go public for more than a couple $2 billion at that time. Today, with SPACs and everything else, that might be a totally different number. But at that moment, we felt like, we were probably worth more strategically than we were as a public company. And we felt like, we had two choices: either build through the cycle to build that vision for that 2025 company, which would need another few $100 million of investment. And I didn't want to take private equity money. I wanted to actually have the operating flexibility that we'd had as a fully independent company. We could go public at a suboptimal valuation. and then AT&T offered to buy us. And it was a terribly hard decision. I think Michael and I spent so many airplane flights just debating. Like one day he'd be like, we can't sell this company. He'd convince me. And I'd walk in the next day, I'm like, you're right, we can't sell. He's like, no, we have to sell. We have to sell. Cookies are going away and we can't compete with the heft of Google. And, we're strategically on the wrong foot. We haven't been able to get the next, every day we change our mind. And I think that was the best part about the leadership team. All of us were just actively fighting and debating about everything all the time. And I think it was the right decision given what we knew then. I won't say that I don't regret it often, looking at the world today and imagining what we could be doing right now if we were still independent.
So I want to dig in a little bit about, you're talking about from your perspective, but I think it would be really interesting to hear from a strategic buyer's perspective. Why would AT&T pay $1.6 billion plus for AppNexus? And so could you talk a little bit about the relationship that you had with AT&T and also other things that you believe that you had done to create a dynamic for which they would pay, essentially, almost 6 times, the capitalization and pay, over $1.5 billion for the company. What was it that was, well positioned? Why was the company well positioned from their perspective? And what was your relationship like that with them?
Well, I think AT&T had a strategic thesis around Warner Media and what they wanted to do. If you recall, that was all caught up in some antitrust stuff. But their thesis was basically that they had this massive ad business and, in TV, and that if they could bring some of this world-class technology to the table, that could be a multiplier effect on their, sort of TV, like their digital TV ad revenue. I don't know that we particularly understood the thesis, to be honest with you. Like they didn't tell us, here's why we're buying you. It just sort of happened.
Yeah.
They made an offer. And we suspected that. But one thing that I will say about that particular deal was that AT&T was a major customer of ours, right, as a marketer. So they were one of our largest advertisers. So we knew the acquisition side of AT&T really, really well. But Warner Media wasn't part of AT&T yet. And so they were still trying to figure out what they wanted to do, like almost like in a contingent basis. Like if this deal goes through, then we want to double down on an ad business. And then we're going to acquire these other pieces. I think they had a whole complicated thesis that we were part of. So, our main point to them was, we have a lot of optionality. Like this is an incredibly amazing group of people. Like the AppNexus team, the technology stack, like it was the best in the business. It is probably still the best in the business. And we basically said, look, if you hit our number, we'll be whatever you want us to be. Like we're not going to come in and tell you what you should do. We're super excited about the idea of taking some of the AT&T assets and putting them together with what we've built.
So part of it is also that they knew you very well. They were a customer of yours, and also you knew Brian Lesser very well as well. Is that right?
Well, Brian worked there, right? So he was the one articulating their ad strategy. So he knew us really well.
Right, exactly.
But we didn't know AT&T at a corporate level. We mainly dealt with Brian Lesser and some corp dev folks. So, it happened pretty fast as well. I mean, this was not a long process. This was kind of like, we're about to file an S1. We had a few strategic conversations with sort of the obvious suspects, and they said, let's do it.
Great. Okay. So why don't we talk a little bit about your post-transaction experience? So, the company's acquired, you're now part of AT&T. What was that like? What was your feeling once the deal was closed? What were you thinking at that point, and where did you go from there?
Well, before the deal, they had sort of come up with this vision for Xandr, which was going to put the direct TV ad business together with AppNexus. And they'd hired a management team. They had a fully staffed leadership team. The only role they were really missing was the CTO. And they asked me, do you want to be the CTO of this combined business? And I said, no, I don't really want to be a CTO at this point in my life. Yeah. And we had a guy named Ben John, who was our CTO, who was extraordinary. And I said, look, you should hire him anyway because he's the best in the business. And the tech team at AppNexus was a bunch of former CTOs. We had so much tech talent. Like, don't just put Ben in that job and you'll never regret it. And I don't think they have. He's been extraordinary and done a great job for them.
Great.
So I knew before the deal that I didn't have a home. Like, we knew that they had a management team that they wanted to put in place. Yeah. And so, it was so sad for me. Like, we had a leadership offsite and we kind of had like a funeral for AppNexus, but we said, long live AppNexians. And our thesis was that it would never be AppNexus again, but that the team, the people, the values, the mission, that would go with us wherever we went. And I think the AppNexians, like the team, really have spread that to so many companies around New York and London and other geos. Like, I'm so proud of all of those people for what we built. And the fact that it's still stable inside AT&T after all this transition, that the business is still working, is a huge testament to everybody. Yeah. So, I mean, I was basically out of leadership within 6 weeks of the deal. I stayed for 6 months just optically, but I wasn't doing anything. And Michael transitioned a little bit later, and some of the key leaders, and I think that was a huge mistake on the AT&T side because it was such a great team. Like, it's hard to imagine not wanting us, but that's probably just my own bias because I love those people. I love them. And I can't imagine not wanting them to run your company. But that's part of being acquired. It's not my choice. I advocated aggressively for my team to stay, and I've actually since started a company called Waybridge, and many of the folks are from AppNexus. And it's been such a pleasure to sort of take all those learnings and bring them into a new industry, where we're really trying to figure out how the supply chain works and how to take some of these ideas that we learned in advertising and plug them in to a world where you're talking about sustainability and resiliency, not of instantaneous digital transactions, but like copper cathode loaded in a truck or a train or on a ship, fueling actual large factories. So many similarities. And the most important point being deep commitment to building a world-class organization with great people that we invest in. I think that's the biggest takeaway for me from the AppNexus experience is AppNexians are what made it AppNexus. Not me, not strategy, not customers, not investors, 100% about people.
So it's a fantastic
story. Couldn't agree more.
And we're going to jump into Q&A, and actually it's a great segue what you're as you're talking about Waybridge. So we have a few questions here. One is from Shika Chowdhury, the Director of Strategy and Ops at Xandr, who asks, why did you decide to move away from ad tech, and what is your outlook for the future of the industry? I guess for the industry.
Well, first of all, hi. I think the real reason I moved away from ad tech was because I had a non-compete with AT&T. And part of the deal was, we don't want you, but you can't go work for our competitors. And at the time, it seemed like a challenge. Like, could I go do this again in a different industry? And I kind of took it that way. I was like, who knows? And that's sort of what got me thinking about it. And when I started to think about what I wanted to do with my life, not super financially motivated, but I wanted to have a real impact. I wanted to go do something where I could actually say to my kids, the reason that, we as a species have survived and are able to live great lives is because of what I did. I wanted to have a real impact. And I thought about doing something purely in sustainability. But I was like, I actually want to solve real problems. I want to build businesses and marketplaces. And so the supply chain is the connection between the earth, where everything we eat and everything we touch comes from, and the economy and the environment and business models and all the things I love. And so it turns out that it's totally, completely fascinating. I find it to be exciting, challenging, mind-bending, in the same way that advertising was such a mystery to me in 2003. And I get to work with brilliant people who challenge me every day. I couldn't be happier doing it. It feels like ad tech in the sense of that energy and complexity and dynamism, just with a totally different market.
Yeah, really interesting. So we got a couple other questions here. So this is probably, from Jason Balk, the CFO of Integrity. What were the major differences in building AppNexus compared to Right Media?
Well, I mean, Integrity was one of our very first customers at Right Media. So it's kind of amazing. I mean, 17 years later, we're still talking. I like that. I think the biggest difference was that I didn't know anything when I started working at Right Media. I had no idea what were good ideas or bad ideas. I didn't know you couldn't do it. No one told me this was impossible. Whereas with AppNexus, we'd seen it, and it was much more about a land grab, like who would get there first. Everybody knew the ad exchange was the thing. I felt like I had a target on my back from day one. And so I feel like Waybridge is much more like Right Media. I don't know why this is a bad idea. I can't figure out why no one's doing it. And so every day I'm kind of like, I really hope like I'm not missing something totally obvious, because it seems like this is an amazing idea, but I'm not an expert. It's so wonderful not to be an expert, to be able to ask stupid questions like, how does copper become wire? Which, if you've done that for your whole life, it's obvious. For me, it's magic. It's completely magic. I still don't really understand it.
Cool. So we have another question from Kam Mo Lau, co-founder and CEO of Papergy, who asks, what do you think is the future of identity with cookies, et cetera, going away?
Well, Kamo, congratulations on your acquisition, and welcome to Walmart. I think cookies are probably pretty dead, but dead in the medium term, not the immediate term. I think we've seen this defragmentation of the internet happening consistently for the past decade. I don't see Apple changing its attack on identity. I think Google is realizing that being a first party that owns all the data and controls all the connection points is pretty great. And I think it's gonna be really, really hard, given regulatory frameworks and tech monopolies, to rely on identity. And a question for us as an industry is, what does it mean? Like, do we really want to fight this fight? Or should we go think about how to make advertising effective without personal identification? And might that actually be better societally and better economically for the companies that we care about, for instance, producers of quality content? So I'm sort of excited about that answer. And I think the entire industry is on the wrong foot about innovation in that direction.
Yeah. Well, this has been really exceptional. A fantastic story. There's so much substance to it. You have had remarkable success, not only through Right Media, but to hear the whole story of AppNexus through all the rounds of capital, the acquisitions, the development, the different economic cycles that you went through, and obviously a fantastic outcome. Exiting to AT&T for $1.6 billion. I'd also say that it's also refreshing and exciting to hear that you're now applying everything that you've learned to apply that to to making the world a better place and figuring out supply chains and other things that and to make the physical commodity goods more efficient system. So really appreciate all that you're doing and heading right now. So thanks so much for joining us. And thanks for participating here.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, it's been really terrific. So thanks to all our audience for joining us here on MadisonAlley.tv. We hope that this was as insightful for you as it was for Doug and me. And I'd also like to remind everyone that upcoming as our next fireside chat guest will be David Williams, who is the former chairman and CEO of Merkle, which was acquired by Dentsu for over $1.5 billion. And we'll continue our series on a founder's story, the path to a landmark transaction. This has been really exciting for us, and we've gained so much insight. Brian, again, thanks so much for joining us. It's really been a pleasure, and we wish you the best of luck as you continue on with Wayward.